Hello, everyone. Thanks for popping in to Fire Safe Sonoma's speaker series. This is something we do once a month. I'm Roberta McIntyre, and I'm here today. I'm the president and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma. We've got a really good program today. I think you're all going to like it. It's going to be on Measure H. But a couple things real quick as we get going here before we dive into our presentation. A handful of things we want to go over. Let's see, how many people are in the house? We only have 13 people in the house. What we do, also real quick, in addition to our presenter, Chief Aker, thanks for coming, Chief. I want to also thank for helping out Harry Hubble, our Climate Corps Fellow, and Marika Ramson, Fire Safe Sonoma's FireWise Community Coordinator. So they're helping me out mostly behind the scenes. They won't be behind the scenes if I mess things up. They'll jump in and help me fix whatever I break. So thank you guys for helping me out as always. And then I'm still hoping the attendance number increases because those that are return visitors know that if we have more than 24 attendees, we do give out, or I give out a house prize or door prize, I should say, house prize, door prize. Last month, we did have more than 24 attendees, and we did declare, I did declare that I would be providing a door prize, but I forgot to do that last month. So I will be doing that probably over this weekend. I'll go back to last month's attendee list, do a check and do a random selection of those attendees. And then, send whoever that is an email letting them know that they won the Fire Safe Sonoma Speaker Series door prize. Okay, so last month we had Annie Barber on our show to talk about the insurance animal in the space of wildland fire safety and mitigation. And she kind of shared with us her insight. She's with the United Policyholders, and she did a real good job of getting us as up to date as we can be on what's going on in the insurance industry relative to your, fire insurance or your hazard insurance on your home as it relates to wildfires. And then next month, we're going to have Jason Mills from Ecological Solutions doing a presentation on ecological methods of doing fuels reduction. I think he's going to cover a little bit about Scotch broom. And then also with me today is my dog Buddy, who is chiming in. So double check the attendees. We still don't have 24. So darn it. Okay, I'm going to have to move on. All right. Okay, this month we have Chief Aker, who started his fire service career as a volunteer firefighter with the City of Sonoma Fire Department while he was still in high school, right? So then he spent 27 years working for the City of Pinole in West Contra Costa County, part of Battalion 7. He continued to volunteer for a total of 30 years with both the city and Shell Vista. He worked his way up to Pinole's acting fire chief before being named Sonoma Valley Fire District Chief in January of 2017. He's overseeing the consolidation and formation of the Sonoma Valley Fire District and contracts for service with the City of Sonoma and now Kenwood Fire Districts for fire protection services. He's taken on numerous leadership roles locally, regionally, and statewide. He also serves as president of the Sonoma County Fire Chiefs Association, original member of the Fire Services Working Group, which has an impact and is a driver for the Measure H. And he's also chair of the REDCOM Board of Directors. REDCOM Board of Directors is a group that works with the REDCOM Dispatch, or Fire and Emergency Medical Services Dispatch Center. That entity is paid as an independent contractor to provide those services, and it's overseen by a board of directors, which he's a member of. Gosh, this goes on and on. Your bio, Chief, is huge. Let's see.
I did say this was for another thing. I just copied and pasted. I said, you know what, for
Okay.
the sake of time, we don't need to go through the whole thing. That's not really who I am, but I was asked to do a full
Yeah,
bio and I just shared
it's almost endless, so I'm gonna leave it there. Those are the
Yeah,
things
that's good
that look
enough.
like they're
Thank you.
most relative to Sonoma County for sure. And things. So with that, I'm gonna pass the baton over. One last check. We still don't have 24. Okay, that's it. We're closing the door on the door prize. I'm gonna hand it over to you, Chief Aker, to go ahead and share with us about the Measure H, which is what we're talking about today. I failed to mention that earlier, perhaps. But today, Chief Aker is going to talk to us about the Measure H, which is a public safety sales tax measure that you all will see on the ballot. March 5, I believe, is like the day that we all go vote on that if you haven't already. I already voted by mail. So anyway, I'm going to hand it off to you, Chief. You have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Roberta. I really appreciate the introduction. Very kind words. And I just want to thank Fire Safe Sonoma and all of the attendees for the opportunity to share some information about Measure H. So I'm here today to provide some educational and information about the measure. This is not advocacy. We kind of run a fine line there within the political rules, and so Fire Safe Sonoma, the Sonoma County Fire Chiefs Association, and the campaign committee can certainly advocate. But today, I'm here just to provide information and hopefully answer any questions that all of you may have about Measure H. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. These kind of stakeholder community engagements are really, really important to us and have been a really central part of what we have done to craft this measure. And with that, I am going to start sharing my screen. Okay, so the proposed fire service sales tax measure H will be or is on the March 5th ballot. As Roberta said, many of us have already received our mail-in ballots. And so now it's a matter of turning them in or going to vote in person, whichever way works best for you. So with that, I want to talk about some background. So the county fire chiefs had an effort to improve fire and EMS services. We recognize that dire need, critical need right after the 2017 fires. We honestly did not have enough resources. We did not have enough coordination. We did not have adequate alert and warning. There was a lot of things that we looked at really quickly afterwards that needed to be addressed. There's a lot of efforts with the Department of Emergency Management creation with Chris Godley and his leadership that addressed a lot of the issues in a cooperative manner with the fire leadership on alerts and warnings, evacuation zones, routes, all of that, and better coordination countywide. What we focused as fire chiefs, what we focused on was we had gaps, some pretty significant gaps in service. And a lot of this is born out of our transition to go from a predominantly all volunteer response model to needing to go to at least a combination response model, if not a career. So a lot of Sonoma County, as we go back in history, is agricultural, rural in nature. And, the farmers, the ranchers would become part of a volunteer fire company or fire district and drop whatever they were doing to respond when emergencies happened. Well, over time, we lost the number of volunteer firefighters. There were also challenges with, of course, cost of living, training requirements, and just the demand for service greatly increased over the years. So what we found ourselves was struggling to, okay, how do we fill that gap? And so we looked to National Fire Protection Association standards, the NFPA, and we did a data-driven process. Within that, we also engaged with the local fire chiefs and their elected representatives because they're the experts in each local area. You know, we can take data based on national standards and overlay it on a map. But really what we needed to do was hear from the local chiefs and elected representatives. The result of that was Measure G, which was placed on the ballot in March of 2020. It was placed on the ballot by the County of Sonoma. We had a very strong, positive working relationship with the county to get this measure on the ballot. Most unfortunately, it failed to pass the 2/3 threshold by less than 2%. So shortly after that, after kind of licking our wounds for just a month or two, we went back to the drawing board because the needs haven't changed. There was still a lot of need for increased services, increased fire stations, firefighters, and capacity to our overall system, as well as service equity. One of the big things that we looked at with Measure G at the start was we didn't look at political boundaries. We did not look at jurisdictions from one fire agency to another or supervisory districts or any of that. We just looked at the county as a whole and said, where are our gaps in service? Where do we really need to reinforce things? And so that was the driving force of all of this, or principle. So we developed a new strategy. This took some time. Very honestly, we did some thorough explorations and evaluations of different ways that we could do things. And what we decided on was that we were willing to invest with our labor partners and our volunteer associations to try to do a petition-driven citizens initiative. This has been something that we have worked on for a long, long time. Well, I shouldn't say a long, long time, but in the recent past, spawning out of the 2017 fires is trying to build unity and a really strength of unity within the fire service elements within Sonoma County. And that means not just the Chiefs Association, but our labor partners, our volunteers, and our elected representatives. And we have come a really long way since 2017, even since 2020, to be united. And with that unity allowed us the opportunity to say, yeah, we can raise a significant amount of funds to try to put a citizens initiative on the ballot. So this does require just a simple majority to pass. We consistently poll at between 65 and 67% favorable. This goes back to when we first did polling back in 2019. So we feel confident about that. The negatives from as compared to our first initiative as well as this one is the common questions we get is how come there's no sunset? Well, very honestly, the need's not going to go away in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. We are always going to need additional firefighters and paramedics to serve our communities, especially as we grow and the demands for service grow. The other negative from Measure G was that there was a significant portion of Measure G that was funding that was managed by the county. And we found through polling that there was a pretty strong distrust of the county of Sonoma and government that really turned off voters. So as I mentioned, what we've focused on is the improved relationships and unity. We did also change our fire service working group representation. We added local 1401's firefighter union president to have labor's voice within those conversations. We also added an elected representative from the districts association that added that voice. And I think that went a long way towards as well as with just really increased communications and outreach, really built this really strong coalition that we're now experiencing and benefiting from. So the campaign itself is being run primarily by the unions, 1401, 3593, Healdsburg's union, Petaluma's union. Everybody is full in. We've gotten tremendous involvement from our volunteer associations as well. So this new ordinance, instead of being managed by the County of Sonoma, as Measure G was proposed to do, this is being managed by the Sonoma County Fire Chiefs Association. We did change the allocation formulas compared to Measure G. And again, we did that through the data-driven process of standards of cover through the National Fire Protection Association standards, as well as meeting with local labor, fire chiefs, and elected representatives for what communities really need. We also enhanced the Community Oversight Committee. We increased the numbers and the way that those positions were dedicated to or allocated to. But again, the primary focus on this measure was adding local firefighters to our capacity and building or remodeling or upgrading fire stations. This measure is going to add 200 firefighter and paramedic positions within our county. That is tremendous. When we faced the Nuns and Tubbs fires in 2017, we were on our own. We had very, very little backup from neighboring agencies outside of Sonoma County, neighboring op areas, because there was something like 17 or 23 other significant incidents going on in the northern part of the state. So resources were thin. With this measure, those extra 200 firefighters are going to put at least 50 additional engine companies on our capacity to be able to respond when we have not only those small incidents that they can hopefully keep to a small scale, but when we have a significant incident, that's that added capacity. So that was primarily our focus. While this measure is estimated to bring in between $60 and $62 million a year, the fire service critical needs was over 90 million. So we had to do some hard cutting. And within that, I'll get to another focus here, which I think is probably where a lot of the attendees are more focused on, which is the veg management and defensible space portion of this measure. So the new ordinance is the Improved and Enhanced Local Fire Protection, Paramedic Service, and Disaster Response Initiative. There are 6 categories that agencies that receive funding from this measure can spend it on: wildfire prevention, preparedness, emergency response and veg management, recruitment and retention of local firefighters, updates to essential equipment and facilities, transfers of funds, implementation costs, and some county-wide expenditures. So some of the new elements, as I mentioned, the Independent Oversight Committee, which will review expenditures for each and every agency every single year, are going to be independent county residents, 11 appointed members. They include reps from cities, from fire districts, from the community at large, Taxpayers Association. There's a lot of different labor. There's a lot of different members that are representative organizations within that membership. Kind of already talked about the allocation plan. Big key point though is the last 2 bullet points under the new allocation plan is fully 10% of our expenditure plan is dedicated to veg management. And that was a balancing act, very honestly. We recognize as fire service leaders the importance of vegetation management, of defensible space programs, inspections, home hardening, making our communities more fire resilient. We've seen it, and it wasn't just 2017, it was then 2019 with the Kincade, it was 2020 with the Wall Bridge and LNU, it was 2021 with the glass. We've had more than our fair share of fire incidents, and we recognize that. So we balanced the needs of what we got from the fire service community, which was 90 million just in terms of response. Excuse me. And what our expenditures were, which was 60 million. And we prioritized veg management in that. And I hope that is shown as a meaningful amount, considering what the need was for just emergency response and critical infrastructure. The countywide funding, which will benefit all agencies throughout the county, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in another couple of slides, but it's being distributed by the County Fire Chiefs Association, not the County of Sonoma. And as I mentioned before, each and every agency will have an annual performance audit requirement that goes to the oversight committee, and there's mechanisms in place that if we have any agency that is not meeting the goals and objectives and criteria of how to spend these funds, we have means of pursuing remedies, shall I say, to that. So again, we really focused after, especially, it was already in process since 2017, but especially after the failure of Measure G, we really focused on partnerships and coordination, building relationships. Again, firefighter unions, the volunteer firefighters, veg management between Fire Safe Sonoma, who we recognize as the key leader in veg management in Sonoma County, as well as Ag and Open Space, city managers, mayors and councils, and the rest of the list. I don't want to bore you with reading each and every bullet point, but they were very concerted efforts. So, countywide benefits. This is one that is really important. So the new vegetation management, the added capacity. So we have added apologize, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold. We added a dedicated year-round fuels crew. This is a crew based on the model that the Northern Sonoma County Fire District Marshall and his crew already have in place. This funding will go to them to establish a second year-rounds crew that will be available throughout the county. That crew will be coordinated, at least priority-wise, by Fire Safe Sonoma and the priorities that have already been established within the community wildfire protection programs. We also funded for veg management a full-time executive director for Fire Safe Sonoma. I will say, God bless Roberta, and my hat could not be off more to her in a tip for all of her leadership, her volunteer leadership throughout all these years. We felt no slight to her in any way, shape, or form, but that position needs to be full-time. If they're going to be the coordinator for countywide veg management and fuels reduction programs, which they've done their very best to get to that position, they need a full-time executive director. It's not fair to put that on somebody on a volunteer basis. Obviously, we still love and hope that Roberta stays, as I'm sure she will, involved with Fire Safe Sonoma and all of these efforts. she's an integral part of all of that. And whether she's the full-time director or not, that's her decision to make. But that was a key component of this funding. The other thing we did was we realized that we needed better coordination with veg management. And, the county's got a pretty good program for vegetation management inspections, and they offer partner fire districts, reimbursement funds to provide those services. But honestly, it's a little bit hit and miss. Some agencies have the capacity to provide that level of coordination and inspection. Other agencies just don't have that capacity. So what we decided to do was we established 7 regional veg management coordinators through this measure. So each of the 7 fire service zones that the county is broken into will have a full-time veg management coordinator, and they will work with the executive director of Fire Safe Sonoma to coordinate efforts, to seek out grant funding opportunities, because we know that even though this measure is giving 10% to veg management, that doesn't meet the need of veg management. And I think we can all agree on that. But what 7 additional coordinators, as well as a full-time executive director, that adds capacity. And that capacity can be coordination, it can be going after grant funding, and other sources of funding to be able to then do the work. That hopefully our year-round crews our dedicated year-round fuels crew would be part of the mix. And maybe even at some point in time, maybe there's another crew. But we felt like this was a really good foundational step to add capacity to veg management here in the county in a meaningful way. I've already talked about the 200 new firefighters, the 30 fire station rebuilds. So that's an interesting one too, that I want to share just a couple of bits of information on. And I mentioned we're transitioning from a volunteer service model in the rural areas, especially, to a career or combination. We always feel like we're going to rely on volunteers as a critical component of our system, but they can't be relied on anymore to provide that day in, day out call for service. We need to support them with career staff. A lot of those rural areas, for those that have been out in them, when you look at the rural volunteer fire stations, they're basically just a barn, and that's all they needed to be when they were built. They just needed to be a place that could keep the apparatus safe and out of the weather. But now we need to add staffing. And so as we add staffing, we need living quarters. So that's a large part of what those fire station rebuilds are. Additional countywide benefits. This measure, and this is the big chunk that goes to the County Fire Chiefs Association. About 75% of that funding is covering our REDCOM dispatch fees and enhancement to an emergency command center level of service. And what that means is that there would be a dedicated fire officer on duty 24/7 to assist the dispatchers with command and control of either multiple incidents or expanding incidents. Right now, it's just done on a volunteer basis. It will also fund severe weather upstaffing, whether it's storms, which we've seen, and just on the weekend of the 4th recently, we had upstaffed a strike team of engines. And this isn't a pat on my back necessarily, but certainly my crews, a Sonoma Valley engine was stationed up in Timber Cove, which was getting the brunt of the storm, much more so than we did in Sonoma Valley, even though we were impacted. So being able to upstaff in storms and red flag warning wildfire conditions is incredibly meaningful to add capacity to the systems. We also have technology and training elements that we will be funding countywide, as well as recruitment and retention funding. We're very well aware that hiring 200 new firefighter and paramedic positions is going to be a process, and it's going to be a challenge. And so we needed to dedicate recruitment and retention funds to be able to best do that in order to best serve all of our communities in Sonoma County. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions related to the measure or anything that I talked about.
Perfect. Okay. Let's unpin the chief and then we'll entertain questions. I have three already that I want to toss to you. One came through the chat. Are the new veg management positions that you mentioned, are they included in the roughly 200 new firefighter EMT count? And I have a follow-up question to that I've been wondering about myself.
Okay. Hang on one second. Ask me the follow-up question first while I'm pulling that up.
Okay. For the additional fire prevention people,
Yes.
are those going to be public safety or are they going to be civilian positions? Or has that been fleshed out yet?
It has not. So, okay. So to answer that question first, and then I've got the other, sorry, I just had to confirm my numbers. That has not been decided. That is going to be up to each agency that has been designated through the expenditure plan to host one of the or employ and host one of the regional coordinators. So I can just I can't speak, and nor do I want to speak for any other agency, but what I can speak to for my agency, because we will be the host to the regional inspector coordinator for the Sonoma Valley Zone 3, is that we always, just as our way of being, we provide those opportunities internally first to our safety personnel as a kind of limited term assignment, probably 2 to 3 years that they would need to make a commitment to be there. And then if we do not get that commitment, then we would look to the outside.
Okay. Yeah, I can see pros and cons to going in either direction for.
There is for sure. We've had it just for us as an agency, we've had really, really good luck with hiring from within those that are interested. You probably know Gary Johnson, right, Roberta?
Yes.
That's our superstar who came internally and moved into that position. So we're confident that if we can get the right person in there, that's a good model for us, because it grows and develops people for other roles within the fire department, right? As they continue to grow and develop, and we look at succession planning and all that. But I also see the other side of it too, with going to a non-safety person, that you could get somebody with a wealth of experience in veg management and fuels reductions, inspections, programs that we wouldn't necessarily have internally.
Right. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to belabor that point because I'm on the fence, and I think you're correct in leaving it to the individual fire departments to make that call based on their specific needs. Absolutely. That makes sense actually to me.
And then I did get the number for your first question.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so the veg management or the fuels crew is included, but when I look at the numbers, and these are ballpark numbers, so please don't hold us exactly to that number. But when we include the veg management or fuels crew, we're closer to about 215 positions. But when we say firefighter, paramedic positions, the way that we have designed the fuels crew, at least as a starting point, and Roberta, you heard this at the last meeting with Marshall, is the initial design of this is not to have the fuels crew be firefighters, right?
Right, the fuels crews, yes.
Kind of fuels crews, foresters, however you want to describe them, but not firefighters. So when we say 200 firefighters, approximately 200 firefighters, that is a legit number. And then there's going to be the fuels crew on top of it.
Right. Okay, next question from the chat. This is gonna be all over the board, but I'll let you
It's all
answer
good. It's all
rather
good.
rather than me try to answer it, because I've seen the table and I understand the table and how this works, but I think you'll be able to describe it more succinctly in broad terms. So the question is, what is the exact sales tax percentage being proposed under Measure H? Oh, that's different than I interpreted the question. So isn't it like a 0.5% sales tax?
It is a 0.5%.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so just, this came up in the last meeting that we were at and is something that is important to share. Is that, we looked at a number of different funding options when we first went out for Measure G. And then again, after Measure G failed, we looked at a number of different options as well. I know out there from my own studies and just, being aware that there is legitimate concern about a sales tax being regressive, right? And that's a concern for a lot of people in our community. What we decided on after exploring that, really, we found that our two options to raise this amount of money was either a parcel tax that would affect homeowners or property owners, or a sales tax. As we dove in a little bit deeper to it, parcel taxes are tricky because almost all fire districts, not cities, but fire districts in the county already have an existing parcel tax. And to raise the parcel tax enough countywide to be able to get this amount of funding felt like an inordinate burden on property owners, and especially a double hit to those in the rural areas. And we also knew within that, when a parcel tax would be applied to any type of rental, whether it's a single family dwelling rental, a duplex, an apartment complex, or whatever else, you know what? The property owner is not going to absorb that by themselves. They are going to pass them on to the renters. And so that in a way kind of, at least, I don't want to say negated, but it at least was a big consideration that that would be regressive as well, right? Because a lot of our renters are service workers and others that, a sales tax is going to hit, but an increase to their rent is going to hit as well. So that was part of it. And then the other part was, and I think this was even more of a balance or tipping of the scales, is that, we're a tourism-based economy in Sonoma County. And, between transient occupancy tax, when people stay at hotels or they eat out at restaurants or they buy merchandise to support our economy, to tax our visitors a fair share seem to be fair and equitable. I will say from my own district's experience and call volumes, it's about 10% of our call volume is for people that live out of our area. So our visitors are demanding and calling for our service, but they're not paying anything right now for our service. So that was kind of
Yeah, as visitors. And this next question is what I was thinking about when I tossed out that last question. It's like kind of jumbled them up a little bit, but the next question is the more complicated one, but I think you could describe pretty succinctly. And there it is tabulated. So the question is, how will the funds be distributed to existing fire departments? So
Yep.
they
Good.
are tabulated, it's a
Yep.
set percentage. And when I looked at it, I did notice that some fire departments, the smaller fire departments, at least one, maybe more than one, but it'll give you a sense of how this is working. There's at least one fire department whose budget will double, more than double. In how they use those additional funds is dependent on what the chief feels the needs are for the department. And hopefully, I think in many cases it will pencil out to where they'll use that additional revenue or chunks of it for veg management and wildland fire safety and risk reduction.
Yeah, thank you. The funds will be distributed to the fire departments per the distribution plan that's part of the measure. There are set percentages that go to each and every fire agency. It is a little bit tricky, just timing wise, because we had to have the distribution plan set by early June of last year. And so there's a number of the former volunteer fire companies that are allocated within the percentage distribution plan that no longer exist because they've been consolidated into the Goldridge Fire District as of July 1. So what happens in a consolidation is that all of the assets and liabilities go to the consolidating agency. So all of those, whether it's Lakeville, Two Rock, Bodega, all of them that Goldridge consolidated with as of July 1, all of those funds will go to Goldridge. I think what's more important though is you're correct, Roberta, that each and every agency will continue to evaluate what their needs are and where they need to spend the money within those buckets, within those categories that are specified by the measure. But truly, the basis for the allocations was listening to those fire chiefs and elected board members and hearing what their needs were, and then trying to identify, okay, what is the cost of that? For I don't know if this was the one you were thinking of, but uh, Timber Cove, right? That's a big one. But there's a huge gap between, and that's what we looked at again with service equity. There's a huge gap between the North Sonoma Coast stations and then Monterey. And so being able to prop up and add some dedicated responders in the Timber Cove area was super important. Now, it might take them a little bit longer. I mean, very honestly, it's going to take them longer to hire firefighters and get their station to the point where they can house them than it's going to take my agency, but it'll happen. It's all, it will happen, and it'll be a benefit to everyone who's either a resident or a visitor to those areas. But some agencies are farther along right now in capacity and can implement this sooner than others.
Yeah, and you touched on a point there too that a lot of people may not realize is as you go from a all volunteer fire company or fire district to a combination just department or district, where it's part paid, part volunteer.
Yep.
When you bring on those 24/7 staff, a lot of these rural fire stations aren't meant for 24/7 staff. So that's where some of the capital improvements have to come into play. So those fire facilities, those fire stations will need to be upgraded to facilitate the 24/7, 365 staff. So that's,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And then I see Priscilla's comment.
Yeah, I was just gonna dive
Yeah,
into that one.
I appreciate that very much. So Priscilla, you're absolutely correct. The 200 new firefighter positions, while they will absolutely ensure a reliable and timely response to any emergencies in areas throughout the county that are underserved. I mean, we can even look at the city of Santa Rosa, which most of us would think, oh, well, they're the biggest city in the county. They probably got everything dialed in and they're just fine. Well, they're not either. So every area in the county is going to benefit from this increased response, reliability, and better response time, quicker response times, and that added capacity. You are correct as well that the firefighter positions are going to be used out in the community. Absolutely 100%. I know I can't do it to the same extent with each and every one of my fire companies just because of their level of activity. But each and every fire company is expected to be out in the community doing good work. The ones that are in the more rural areas with less call volume, those firefighter positions will be out doing vegetation management inspections, defensible space inspections. We've even had multiple districts come to us in this process and identify that when they get paid positions who are on the clock, regularly, they're actually going to have them go out and do chipping.
Right.
So it absolutely is absolutely it's a holistic approach. I know, we could divide this all up and, look at each element individually, but that's not the fire service. The fire service, we do it all, and we try our best to do our best for each element that we're asked to and tasked with doing.
Yeah, I believe that, all of the new positions, so let me parse that out a little bit. So the veg management positions, that will be their specific job is veg management in that space. But then the other firefighter positions, to just kind of reinforce what you said, Chief, those aren't just going to be people sitting in a box, firehouse somewhere holding down a recliner. Those guys will be out in the community doing public ed events, doing business inspections, as well as doing the County of Sonoma's, I believe they'll be charged with doing County of Sonoma's hazardous vegetation enforcement ordinance.
Absolutely.
They'll be, doing that work, which is vegetation, wildfire safety and risk reduction in the form of those vegetation management inspections. I forget what the county calls it. I originally drafted the draft ordinance before I left the
Yeah,
county.
it's like 13 something.
13A is the
Yeah.
code. Yeah, the code, the county code. Yeah. So yeah, it's not blatantly obvious, but those folks will be involved in the overall mission of reducing wildfire risk. And just so folks know, it took me a while to come on board with the current iteration of this proposal. The last two I wasn't a fan of. In fact, I vocally was, very much against the last iteration of this, but working with the working group and learning how they establish how they came to identify the gap between fire services and what we have currently, as well as how the degree that they're pulling in the vegetation management piece to make it something that, albeit isn't everything we all need, but is something we could probably get past and get some work done. Also, to further that point, I would like to express the fact that the funding that is going towards veg management directly in this endeavor will do at least a couple things that we're struggling with now. To get a CAL FIRE funded veg management grant, CAL FIRE wants to see a maintenance piece built in. In fact, if your grant application doesn't have a maintenance element built in, it's over time is going to be, I think, less and less likely to get funded. And so that's a key element. So with this funding, we'll be able to say with some of the grant applications that, yeah, we have a maintenance piece built in. We have this annual funding that can support the maintenance element that we all know is needed. The other part that it's going to help is with grants. It'll give us some hard match for some of those grants that ask for that hard match. So that's another important piece of it. I think that's going to be helpful when it passes. Let's see, other question in the queue.
Yeah, I see Chris's question.
Perfect.
So Chris, roughly 45 million out of the 60 million is for personnel costs, which you described there as salary, benefits, retirement, administrative costs.
Fully burdened way, yeah.
Yeah. And then I see Priscilla's question as well. So yes, there will be some training that's required to do the 13A inspections. But there are existing training programs that will be that are now and will continue to be available for any agency that that wants to do that. It may not happen immediately, depending on what the training level of the new firefighters are. I mean, a lot of agencies have volunteers or cadets, explorers that have firefighter training, and so they may not need a whole lot. And they're not starting necessarily from scratch, and not having any sort of training in the firefighter side of things. But to add, I mean, we've done just in our own experience, which I can, and I'm sorry, but I can speak to that so much more, confidently and in depth than what other agencies are doing. But we have career folks doing it, our engine companies in Kenwood, in Glen Ellen, they're doing those inspections. It didn't take much to get them up to speed on what that looks like. We also have actually put some of our volunteers to work and trained them up to do the vegetation management inspection. So there are programs. The program has developed nicely. We were one of the first agencies that was part of the pilot program probably 5 years ago. 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's improved, and the focus is education, and getting people to comply, and that's something that we have not found a challenge with trying to train our people up to being able to be effective inspectors with that.
Yeah, and I think that's another added benefit of having the career firefighters on board as opposed to volunteer, because my experience having been a firefighter in a Santa Rosa Fire Department, actually, Metropolitan Department, most career firefighters, well, actually, just to get hired, we want to see on their application that they've had the basic, firefighter 1, firefighter 2 courses, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember if Fire Prevention 1A is part of that or not, if that's an ad. I think it's an ad, but many of them still go after the Fire Prevention 1A or 1, I think they call it now. I used to teach it. And that's your basic fire prevention class. Even in your regular boot firefighter, they're oftentimes taking that class. But also married to that is the fact that in Sonoma County in particular, wildland fire is really key to us. So firefighters working in Sonoma County, they're going to be real keen on knowing, how to do these, I believe, these assessments or inspections, because it's such a key issue in our county. We're almost out of time. I have one more question I think would be nice to close on.
I think so.
Sure there's
I
nothing
see
else.
that. I see that in the chat.
I have another one that's not in the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, let me answer the one from Kevin in the chat, which is
Yes, yeah.
these firefighters that are doing the fuels work in their districts do work in both the SRA and LRA. Kevin, that's a great question. When you describe fuels work, when we look at inspections, vegetation management inspections, defensible space inspections, we have gotten to a point where we are working very closely with our CAL FIRE partners to not double hit property owners. So CAL FIRE tends to do their LE70s, Roberta. Is that what it is?
LE100s.
Oh, 100s.
And
Okay.
that's the CAL FIRE veg inspection.
Yeah, so CAL FIRE is mostly focusing on properties in the SRA, and then the local fire district or cities will focus on the LRA. The fuels crews, I think they will work wherever the priority projects are, and that's not dependent on whether it's SRA or LRA.
And then last question, it's more of, I think I'll leave it with us to reflect on, but if you want to take a crack at it, feel free, because we are right at the 3 o'clock. So I'll leave this with all of us. Does Measure H give Sonoma County firefighters all the resources we need to effectively prevent and fight wildfires around the county? Are there things still missing with Measure H?
Oh, great question. Well, the straightforward answer to that is there are still needs out there.
Yeah.
And what I point to is the fact that when we did our stakeholder engagement with each individual fire agencies within the county, we came up with about 90 million in need, and we ended up bringing it down to 60 million. So there still are needs out there. I think this is such a huge generational change for us and gets us so much farther ahead of where we are today. And I think as we move forward, there's I don't ever want to say that, oh, well, there's not going to ever be another fire tax or parcel tax or anything like that, or creative ways to find funding. That would be disingenuous. And I would never do that. But I think what this does is this gets everybody up to a level where they can provide an adequate and improved level of service than what I shouldn't say adequate. It will allow every single fire agency in this county to provide better service than what they are providing today.
Right.
Now, I think the question mark with that is, what does 5 years or 10 years look like down the road? And will these funds keep up with what the need is? I don't know that. I don't have a crystal ball. But this is going to make a huge change. I think what it's also going to do is it's going to facilitate, if not encourage, some additional consolidations, which, as we've seen, has been very meaningful in providing increased level of services to communities.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at some of the consolidations with Sonoma County Fire District as well as my district. We've brought paramedic service to areas that never had that before, and and reliability of response 24/7. Small districts that were struggling with a volunteer response model to get an adequate response, and sometimes to even get a response, let alone an adequate one, are now getting a full-time response. So
yeah,
I
and
hope that helps.
yeah, it does. For me, at the end of the day, speaking just to the wildland fire safety piece of it, it's not perfect. It's in my opinion far from perfect for the wildland piece. I like a lot of the other things that the measure's doing for overall all risk, fire services. But with regard to the veg management piece, it's not perfect. It's way better than anything we've ever had to date, which is headed in the right direction. And for Fire Safe Sonoma, at least us, I think with others as well, what we'll be able to do is leverage these new positions to get more work done. For example, the way we operate now is we have, one halftime person, Marika. We have leveraged her position into essentially two and a half full-time positions. So Marika supervises 2 Climate Corps fellows, which are full-time staff. So if we didn't have Marika to supervise those 2 staff, we wouldn't have those 2 extra staff. It'd just be Marika doing all the work, and then me as well as a volunteer. And so with a full-time executive coordinator, we will be able to leverage that position, bring on more, AmeriCorps fellows, interns, et cetera. We'll be able to use funds coming in to help us hire grant writers to write good grants, to get more funds coming in with indirect costs to cover additional overhead. So the momentum just grows. It just snowballs from here.
It does completely. And, one of the things that we talked just a little bit about in this meeting, we talked more in the previous meeting, was, home hardening.
Yeah.
And you know what? We weren't able to squeeze anything into this measure on home hardening. But you know what? That's an opportunity that we can leverage some of this additional capacity to try to solve. And in my view, and this is just Steve's view, but that's something that, we look at public funding for, but you know what? Honestly, the insurance companies ought to be putting some money into home hardening because we see
Yeah.
the benefit of that. So how do we come together and be creative about ways that we can accomplish our goals and meet the needs of making our communities fire safe and fire resilient?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't even want to go into the insurance piece. That's another topic for another day.
I know it is, but it's
couple
still,
times.
it's
We've covered it a couple times and we'll continue to cover it as we
well,
learn
and we're working as I imagine Roberta, we're working on it from the Cal Chiefs and Western Chiefs perspective as well. It's a
Yeah.
very important topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. All
Yep.
right. Well, we're out of time. Thanks so much, Chief Baker, for your time today. And folks watching, just remember this will be an evergreen piece of material, so you can find it on our YouTube channel under our playlist called Speaker Series. And then next month, we're going to have Jason Mills as our speaker. And thank you, Marika and Harry, for helping out today. And I think most importantly, thanks for everybody who attended. I hope the information is of value to you and you'll find it useful. And if it is, tell a friend and point them to the recording on our channel. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see
All
you
right.
next month.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you
Abs-
everyone for attending.